Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, sensitive souls. Have we got an amazing episode for you today? I am also so excited to share, just before we dive in, that I have recently been called to birth a deeply healing new group journey with archetypal remedy Aurum. Aurum is the archetype of gold, the universal symbol of perfect shiny power in its shadow, worn by the sovereigns of the world. In January, I'll be guiding sensitive souls into the loving reclamation of a different kind of power than we are used to in our culture, which I'm calling our heart-led feminine power, or our soft power, the reclamation of our capacity to choose life and to choose to step into our gifts and tend ourselves in the fear that comes up. This is for the sensitive women who feel called to be healers, teachers, or guides, but constantly doubt their power, feel fear of stepping in, feel they're not ready or not perfect enough, and feel they need to be shinier, who feel the call of soul to open to their gifts, but equally feel terrified. This journey will guide you into opening to your true power, journeying with self-love, inner child work, and feminine body reclamation for healing of your confidence and gifts, so you can keep walking towards becoming the healer you came here to be, even and especially if you doubt it's possible. It's gold, but it's really like being wrapped in the soft pink of rose gold, a tender, nurturing first step into reclamation of your power. And yes, that is possible without having to be bullshit, harsh, and put on armour. If that is calling to you, then head to nicolebarton.co.uk/Aurum, AURUM, to find out more. On The Secret Witch Show today, our guest is Lucy Pearce. Lucy is the author of multiple life-changing non-fiction books, including Nautilus Award silver winners Medicine Women, Burning Woman, and Creatrix. Her writing focuses on women's healing through archetypal psychology, embodiment, historical awareness, and creativity. An award-winning graduate in History of Ideas with English Literature from Kingston University and a PGCE from Cambridge University, Lucy founded Womancraft Publishing, creating paradigm-shifting books by women for women in 2014. The mother of 3 children, she lives in East Cork, Ireland. In this episode, we explore how to reclaim the magic in our sensitivity and, in particular, neurodivergence. We dive into what neurodivergence is and means, and what signs might help sensitive souls illuminate that they are neurodiverse, as well as why and how women who resonate with this label must meet their sensitive needs rather than trying to mask and fit into a culture that doesn't suit them. Most importantly, though, we shared our important worldview on how neurodivergence can actually be a gift, and especially a superpower that allows magical women to be powerful healers, teachers, and guides. Let's dive in. Welcome, Lucy. I am so delighted to have you here again for a second time. And in particular, to speak to a really important topic that's really dear to my heart, being a sensitive and magical soul. And also, I know we're going to get into this a little bit more on the show, but I'm also neurodivergent. I think last time we spoke, actually, you said, you're neurodivergent, aren't you? And I think I'd only just discovered, like maybe a year before, I was just like, good job, but I hadn't discovered it because I'd have been like, oh, what's that? Which may well be, you know, the way that many women go in this episode even. So anyway, I know, I know you're also a sensitive soul. And so I think this sharing of wisdom and awakening among women is particularly about sensitivity in this crazy modern world feels so deeply important. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be back.
I'm so excited for this. So I would love to start. We were just talking a little bit before we began about just maybe starting off with a bit of your journey as a sensitive woman who began to see that you were neurodivergent, because I know for a lot of women at home, they may be listening to this from the lens of sensitivity, because that's kind of, for me, that's how I came to this understanding. But yeah, I think it could be good to start there. So but I'm happy for you to flow wherever feels aligned.
So I was introduced to the term highly sensitive person by my mum when I was in my early teens. So the highly sensitive person is Elaine and M. Aron. Really groundbreaking research, especially, you know, back in the 90s when this sort of thing wasn't being written about, talked about at all. You know, autism was very much something that was just a label really given to little boys, and especially non-verbal children. There was Asperger's, which was given to little professor types, but again, that was mainly boys. And beyond that, there wasn't really any conversation beyond that. So Elaine Aron really brought the term sensitivity into the mainstream through her books. And that's where my mother, and therefore I, came across that and found it very useful. I mean, you know, I ticked every box in that, you know, kind of, you know, cries easily, very sensitive to sound, to smell, to emotion, to bright lights, you know, needs to have lots of time by themselves. I'm doing these from memory. They might be slightly, I'm remembering ticking the boxes all those years ago. You know, that sort of thing, but feeling things very deeply. So sensitivity not necessarily being a bad thing, but very much being a nervous system that is kind of overhyped or overprimed, but it not being completely bad. So sensitivity to emotion and aesthetics as being a good thing, as being something that, you know, an awful lot of creative people have, an awful lot of people who work in empathetic jobs such as nursing or teaching or mothering naturally have. So it was a great introduction to it because it wasn't pathologizing it.
I love that.
So then, you know, carrying on, going to university, having my first child, age 25, really starting to discover that writing was very much a need for me, my way of expressing myself, my way of sharing what was true for me. The whole way through my childhood, if I needed to say something to parents or a teacher, I would find it really hard to talk to somebody, but I would always write it down. So I was always giving important letters to people saying important things for me. So it's very much how I've always been able to contact my deep feeling and express it in a way that struggling with anxiety and people and social communication makes really hard for me. So I'd say I probably was about 30 before I actually heard the term anxiety, which nowadays seems ridiculous. But, you know, we've got to understand that this was kind of, you know, internet psychology and, you know, everything being everywhere. And so it was only kind of, you know, just under 15 years ago that I would have been able to put the word anxiety and me together and realize that's what I'm experiencing. That's what I'm feeling. And so I always, when I was at play groups with the other mums, like I would really notice that I would really struggle with the chit chat that was expected of me. I'd be really struggling with the amount of noise going on, the chaos, the movement. And the other mums could just seem to block it all out and chat away to each other and enjoy it. Whereas for me, although I liked many of the mums there, I found it really, really hard to connect there because it was just so overwhelming on so many levels for me. And then, when they would talk about, their mothering experience, I was like, yeah, no, I'm experiencing this very differently. I was just regularly completely overwhelmed. There's an experience called touched out in the breastfeeding community. And that's what I experienced all the time. That feeling of just constantly having someone touching you in your energy field, on your body, became painful for me, became exhausting for me. And yet I was emotionally and intellectually drawn towards attachment parenting. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to breastfeed and co-sleep and regulate with my child. And yet I found it unbelievably hard in a way that the other mothers weren't seeming to. So again, I was kind of having these kind of flags as to, hang on, I genuinely am experiencing something a bit different to most other people. And, I'd had many burnouts over the years, many struggles in various ways that I couldn't understand, didn't know what was wrong with me. And so my writing kind of basically has spiraled around this kind of central theme of what's wrong with me, trying to figure it out. And at the same time, wanting to avoid mental health professionals like the plague in case I found out that something really bad was wrong with me. So my daughter was, then I had several years of trying to figure out what was wrong with my daughter. And not getting any insight from professionals. Eventually think we could be looking at autism here. She was diagnosed. I was then diagnosed 6 months later by the same professional, which is very, very common. They say that with every child diagnosis comes an adult diagnosis. Neurodivergence is very, very much genetic, whether we're talking dyslexia or ADHD or dyspraxia or autism, whatever, they are all very strongly genetically linked. So if you have a child who has been diagnosed with any of those neurodivergences, the chances are that either you or your parent or one of your parents is neurodivergent as well. So for me, that was a real eye-opener. It was a new lens on the, in inverted commas, what's wrong with me thing, to reframe it as, in a way, actually there's nothing wrong. It's not a mental health condition, which is what I was really scared of. It is a different way of having your brain wired, a different way of functioning in the world, one that brings an awful lot of challenges because this world isn't set up for brains like mine and yours, but it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not a curse, but it does come with a lot of challenges as well as gifts. But it's very much in our culture seen still within the medical model and seen within deficit basis. So the way that autism is diagnosed is through 3 core deficits: impaired communication, impaired social interaction, and restricted, repetitive, and stereotype behaviors or interests. I mean, that's not exactly a yay to get diagnosed with that. And yet they are the ways that we can observe it in our culture. That's how we've learned to observe it. So yeah, that's a plotted history.
Yeah, that was making me really emotional actually, listening to your journey, because there's so much resonance with my own journey. And I think even just the way that you kind of broke that down into the kind of different phases of your life as well, particularly around mothering, I think is really, really serving for anyone listening who may well now be like, oh my goodness, like I have no idea. But yeah, there's so much in that, and I'm just wondering where to start. Just so related to all of what you said. I think what stood out to me was this piece about the highly sensitive person. I know many of my clients actually have read that book, because it is, particularly for the people who are listening, I suspect they will deeply resonate with being a highly sensitive person. And we were just talking before as well about the remedy, the archetypal remedy phosphorus, and how that remedy is like, it's what's on the end of a match. So it's like you strike it and it's like, whew, straight into flames, and then of course we'll burn down. And it feels to me like that was my experience. Like you talked about burnout, you talked about, you know, being touched out, and yeah, that very much was my own experience. I'm wondering if we can just kind of break down very, very briefly for anybody who may well be listening thinking, okay, well, I'm sensitive. How do I know if I'm also neurodivergent? Like, is there something we can just briefly speak to in terms of like, what is neurodivergence even, and what different types of neurodivergence are there, and what signs? You've broken them down in a really embodied way already, but if there's anything else that is there to add about the kind of signs that might help people illuminate that they are a neurodivergent one, or a magical one, as I like to call it.
I think the two go hand in hand, personally.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, I say that I come from a creative family on two levels. Both we are creative, as in 3 or 4 generations of us now have been creatively self-employed as potters and writers and actors and artists. And because we can't be employed by other people, we're unemployable in that sense, because we wouldn't function well in a 9 till 5, somebody telling us what to do. But we have incredible entrepreneurial skills. We have, you know, a wealth of inspiration inside us, and a desire to make that appear out in the outer world. But we're also neurodivergent in many ways. So we have a strong there's 3 generations of us at least who have Asperger's in my line. There is a strong dyslexic thread going through the male branch of my family. There's also a strong ADHD line, and you know, they kind of interplay and intermingle in each of us, and so each of us has our own little mixture, and not all of us do, but a lot of us do.
I know.
So we're creatively wired.
It's like there's a spike going on between my autism and my ADHD.
Totally. Like my autistic self needs routine and predictability, and to know exactly what I'm doing in a very small, safe way, and no surprises. And my ADHD side is like, let's bring the chaos. And so it's the trying to find the kind of the safe place where I kind of, you know, I don't burn myself out by doing too much of one or the other. So I guess the first thing to say about neurodivergence is that it's a lifelong neurological developmental condition. So you don't develop it suddenly when you're age 20 or age 40. There will have been signs from when you were very, very small, from at least a toddler onwards, signs that you were maybe struggling to do things the way that things were expected of you, struggling to wear clothes, for example. Most pictures of me before the age of 7 are naked. I showed up to your last.
You did. I was remembering that earlier.
You know, clothes is a big one for autistic kids. Sensitivity around skin, you know, needing something soft, just having 1 or 2 favorite things, needing to have just one thing of clothing, but in 5 different colors, or 5 identical things, but just because you know that's safe clothing and you can wear it. Cutting out labels, problems with bits in socks. My daughter used to call them prinkles. But struggling with hair washing, with bathing, with showering, with swimming, struggling with noise, getting overwhelmed, needing to retreat and withdraw, shutting down when you're overwhelmed, being unable to speak, unable to move, unable to process thought, and to literally go into what people associate with autism, which is non-verbal. People like me, I'm very verbal, but when I go into shutdown, my words are gone, my ability to process speech is gone.
It's so interesting you say that, because when I look back to my own experience of being a child, at home I was very, very lively and talkative, but when I went to school they called me mute and sent me to a psychiatrist, because it just all makes so much sense when you look back.
And often children, my daughter certainly was, will be very different in a safe place with safe people to outside. And so outside in school, in a shopping area, whatever, might cling to the parents, might hide, might scream, might lie on the floor and not be able to move, might curl into a ball and go into a corner and just completely detach from any other people around them, ignore anything that is being said to them. And so that is often treated either as extreme shyness, which needs to be, kind of broken out of them, or their abilities are ignored because they're just assumed to be shy, or it's seen as disobedience and something that must be punished and corrected, rather than this is a child or an adult with a nervous system that has shut down because it is so overwhelmed. And there is a big difference between the two of those. And then there are meltdowns. Meltdowns are, it's kind of come into the common parlance now, and I don't think it's the right thing, because a meltdown, when you're talking about someone on Love Island, it's like they're, just kind of shouting a lot and giving out and just a bit cross, but they're still in control of that. Whereas a meltdown is where your nervous system is shutting down and you are responding in the way that you can. And for some people that might be crying, that might be rocking. For some people that might be shouting or screaming or hitting, but they are not in control of that at that point. Like the prefrontal cortex is shut down. It's not in control of that behavior. And so it can be very, very scary to be on the receiving end of that. If someone suddenly, is behaving in a way that you're like, whoa, what's happening here? It's also very scary to experience that yourself, because you genuinely think, oh my God, what's happening? What's just happened? Or you can't think at all because your ability to process is just gone. All you know is that you are lying in a ball in the checkout queue, wailing, and everyone's crowded around you. And it's absolutely horrific. And that only happens when we're so overwhelmed and stressed that is the only response our bodies can now do. So when we are well regulated, when we know how to look after our sensory needs, when we know how to plan our days so that we only do as much as our energy can allow for, our nervous systems can allow for, then we don't get to that state. But if we're living in a state of constantly being pushed beyond what we are capable of doing, then that state happens again and again. And when that happens again and again, or when we do everything we can to avoid that, and so we're not melting down, it's not resetting our brains, because that's the thing. It's like a vomit. Like it's literally, it resets the brain and you can function again afterwards. And that feeling of like cotton wool that you're getting as it's kind of building up, and then suddenly that storm, it's horrific to experience, but there is great clarity at the other side, because it's like, oh God, I can breathe again, I can function, my brain's working, and it is, but it's like vomiting in front of somebody. There's that degree of shame around it that you don't do that in public. That's really like gross. And, so it's really tricky. But if you keep stopping yourself melting down, or if you keep avoiding shutdowns in some way and just getting around the outside of them, that's when we burn out. Because the nervous system just can't do anymore. It has done everything it can do and more, and it can't function.
I love that you share that, because I think that's one of the things that was just occurring to me as you were speaking about that, is this sense of, and in the women who are listening, I suspect they're going to be deeply resonating with that, and particularly the piece about the shame around the meltdowns, because I know from my own experience, it was like I used to have these meltdowns and just feel this deep sense of shame, and then just try and keep them hidden, like keep suppressing them. And like you say, that's what had me burn out. So I think that's really, really important. And I think also a really important reason as to why this is such an important topic for women who are deeply sensitive actually, whether they're neurodivergent or not, like if you're deeply sensitive, there's a real importance in healing that shame and loving yourself in that, so that you can own it and regulate your nervous system.
So to a lot of people, they avoid getting a label because they're a bit kind of snooty about, oh, well, you know, everyone's trying to get attention by getting labels or whatever, or I don't want to be medicalized or whatever. But whether you are given the label diagnostically or you just own it yourself, having researched it enough and think, yeah, this really does fit my experience, what it gives you is not an excuse, not a get out of jail free card, but it gives you a lens to understand yourself and how you function, your strengths and your challenges. And then it helps you to find the tools that will be helpful to you in order to regulate, in order to better manage yourself and your life, so that you're not having to melt down as much, you're not having to shut down as much, because you're caring for yourself before you get to that end point.
I love that so much, because I think so many women will just think that's just who I am, that's just how I am, you know, I just have these emotional meltdowns, instead of seeing that there's actually a reason why, and it's that your nervous system isn't regulated. And that, I think, in itself opens up that possibility to think, actually, there's a new way that I can learn to create life in which I'm able to meet my needs. And I think it's almost like that cycle again of like, well, yeah, but I'm too sensitive, like I should just fit into the world. So maybe we can talk a little bit about fitting into the world, because I think there was something you said earlier about the world not being set up for neurodivergent people, which, I mean, you know, when we think about even neurodivergent as a word, you know, we're talking about brains that diverge from the normal.
From the typical.
So, yeah, exactly, from the typical. So yeah, I'm wondering if we can speak to that a little bit, because, you know, our modern world, and I think this is important for women to know, is it's not that there's something wrong with us. Like, the world just isn't set up to cater for those needs.
So, there's so many things I want to say to that. Where to start? I guess I'll backtrack slightly, and that is a piece around shame. When we feel shame, we cut ourselves off because we think we're the only one. We think there's something wrong with us, that we're bad, that we're alone in this. And the thing I think that's most healing for anybody, whether they are neurodivergent or not, is community, a sense of belonging, a sense of being valued and loved. And so what we need to do in order to make our way out into the world as safely as we can is to find safe people and safe places, and to be constantly seeking to expand those as we can, but to start with people who we feel absolutely safe with, who we can share the language that we have learned around neurodivergence or autism or whatever it is for you, who can understand us, so that when we get diagnosed, we get this label, but this label also gives us language. So we can suddenly talk about something which we've never been able to talk about before. So previously there's been silence around these things that have been deeply shameful for us. Now we can actually speak about them because we have words, and we know we're not alone. We know that this is something that 5% of the population experience, or whatever it might be. And so that is a very, very powerful thing in itself, to no longer be hiding the truth of who we are and the truth of our experiences and our struggles with those who are dearest and closest to us. And that is deeply powerful for everybody involved, and shifts and changes relationships. And suddenly you're not having to try to pretend to be somebody else, trying to pretend to be who somebody else needs you to be or wants you to be. So if you're making plans for dinner with a friend, you can now say, look, I find that restaurant really loud and overwhelming. Could we meet at this one that's much quieter? It's got carpet and it's not so busy this time of day. You know, that sort of thing. And you can say it. You're not guilt tripping other people. You're not being a victim, but you're literally you realize what it is, and you can communicate that to them. I've got friends all of my friends invite me to parties and they say, Lucy, there is zero pressure to come. I know you find parties really hard. I would really love you to be there. And I really am okay if you're not there. So you just do what you need to do. And for people to genuinely say that and mean it, rather than me spend weeks getting stressed about it, getting more and more wound up, thinking I really have to be there. It's my best friend's party, but they're going to be, you know, all of that. And then go in and have a meltdown because I'm so stressed. Instead, I know I could go for half an hour and leave. I know I could not go and just phone her the next day, or go out for a walk in the woods with her and spend special time with her in a different way. And that it won't impinge on our relationship, because our relationship is deep and true. She knows why I won't go. It's not that I don't like her. It's that I can't function in that situation.
That's so beautiful.
And she wants me to function. And I want me to function, and I want to spend dear time with her, and she wants to spend dear time with me. And a party might not be the best place for that.
Yes, I've got a similar example actually, personally, with being invited to a children's party where I know it's soft play, and that's like the world's worst nightmare for me. I'm just like, do you think we could do something else another time? So yeah, that really resonates with me. But I think it's also really highlighted something else that is important, is that this idea of masking as well, which we haven't necessarily talked to, because I think that's something that sensitive women do tend to do a lot of. And as you were just speaking to, like, there's a deep reclamation as we start to begin to understand all of this. Really, there's that invitation to be ourselves, but I think even just realizing that we maybe haven't been being ourselves for much of life is also really helpful to see.
Well, I spent a huge amount of my life trying to be how I thought I should be. Well, first of all, trying to be a good girl. I write a lot about this in Burning Woman, burning the good girl. But you know, for me, it was the fear of getting in trouble, because I wouldn't know how to handle that. You know, for somebody on the spectrum, following rules is like really key, because that's how we stay safe, and rules are literal for us. And so they're not just kind of, you know, guidelines, they're rules. And so that's a really tricky one. And so I did a lot of masking, trying to be who I thought I needed to be in each situation. Autistic women, neurodivergent women tend to be very good at kind of being chameleon-like, kind of being different people in many, many different situations, but then always feeling like they're never actually really themselves. And I certainly used to do that. And that's the reason why a lot of women don't get diagnosed, is because they're able to put a mask on and, you know, kind of smile at the appropriate time. They might not be able to look you in the eyes, but they'll look at you nearish the eyes. And so they're not going to get kind of, you know, found out on that one. They know that they kind of have to take their turn in talking. So they'll try and do that. They'll try as hard as they can not to interrupt. You know, they'll try not to talk too long about the things that they really like, all ways that we're trying to fit in and be accepted. And so masking is a skill that women, all women, need to do in patriarchal culture. We need to be pleasing to other people, because, you know, as a woman, our culture is not made for you either. So women are naturally masking all the time.
Ooh.
Neurodivergent women are having to mask even harder. So, you know, it's a big one. And, you know, it's very tricky, because for sensitive people, autistic people, a sense of authenticity is at our absolute bedrock. It is vital and important. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where we can't be ourselves, because ourselves, our true selves, are usually labeled as weird or odd or eccentric or strange or too much. And we learn early on in childhood from teachers and family members and little children who really, you know, say what they think and don't care about the effects on it. You get called weirdo enough times, and you learn to shut that part of yourself down or hide it. You learn it's not acceptable. And so, many autistic people, like one of the things is a special interest or a very kind of intense passion about something often quite unusual. And so for autistic boys and men, that is often seen in like train spotting or kind of a passion for memorizing numbers or something. And it's almost allowed for a man to be eccentric in a way that it's more challenging for a woman to, because when you're an eccentric woman, oh dear, that starts to tip into a crazy woman pretty fast, because women are seen as crazy pretty easily as soon as they're not nice, good, as society wishes that they would be. So you add in some eccentricity to a woman and you've got crazy woman accusations, you've got the witch word coming your way pretty fast.
I was just thinking that as you were talking about it, and the witch the witch wound. No, there's so much in that. I'm just wondering where to go, because of course, when we think about witch, I want to definitely talk about the gifts of being neurodivergent, and so we could go there. I'm just wondering if there's anything more around not fitting into the world, and the world not being...
Well, the witch is the outsider. The witch is the powerful feminine outsider. And the autistic person, the neurodivergent person, is also an outsider to neurotypical culture. But the autistic person, especially because we love time to ourselves, need huge amounts of time to ourselves, time in our very rich inner worlds, that can be scary to other people, because they don't know what's going on in your head. They don't know what's going on when you're in your house or in your room for hours and hours, days and days, weeks and weeks by yourself, or you're crouching down on the path, kind of trying to find every mushroom you can, or collecting every little skull that you come across when on your nature walks, and kind of carefully polish them and put them on a shelf. Like, that's not normal behavior.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. And and I think that speaks to me of one of the gifts of women who are sensitive. And this is always something I talk about with archetypal phosphorus is, we shame that deep sensitivity, but without that deep sensitivity, we wouldn't be magical. We wouldn't be the healers, teachers, guides, light workers of the world. So I think I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit around, what are the gifts? I mean, you talked to it a little bit in terms of creativity. I'm just wondering if there's anything else to explore around that, because I think sometimes, like as we've said, it can be seen as this like disorder. Whereas the way I see it, and I don't know, I'm interested in how you see it, it's like, for me, it's not a disorder, it's just a difference. It's like it's just a different way of working. In fact, there was, I can't remember where it was an article in a psychology, some kind of I can't remember where it was now, but it was saying about neurodivergence, and also, you might have read it, also other mental classes, classed as mental disorders like depression or anxiety. There was an article talking about how it's like an evolution of our species in accordance with how our world is evolving. It's almost like the neurodivergent brains are the ones who are here to be the leaders of the future, was the gist of the article. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you have to speak to on that, or whether you indeed even saw that article.
I didn't see that article, but a friend showed me another article. So that article is talking about the future, as in, the people who are inventing the technology that we are using to be able to talk on Zoom, the computers we're using, all of that were probably autistic people. It's Silicon Valley is absolutely chock full of autistic folk, and they have one of the highest autistic children levels in the whole of the US. That's known fact. And how do you get that many autistic kids? Because one or more of the parents are autistic. So autistic minds are building a future for us. But a friend sent me this article about, now, how they figured this out, I don't know. They reckon that the first cave painters were also neurodivergent, because they were seeking to, represent the inner world in an outer way, and we're experimenting with how to do that. Now, as I say, I don't know how they did that, how they kind of made that assumption. because I don't recall the whole article, but I just find it interesting that that's the eve of humanity and the cusp of where we're going. Both have neurodivergent people leading the way, and yet neurodivergent people in a school classroom are seen as, you know, tricky or other. Neurodivergent people in the workforce are like annoying people that you're having to make annoying accommodations for. So I just, you know, we haven't lived in this world ever before. I mean, that sounds really obvious, but we don't think of that. Like the amount of lights that are on in every room, in every place you go, the amount of background noise that there is on every road that you walk down, in every shopping mall that you go to, is twice, 3 times the amount that it was when we were kids. And when we were kids, it was 2 or 3 times the amount that it was when our parents were kids, and then when their parents were kids. Like this world has got louder and faster and brighter year on year on year. And those are the things that autistic minds struggle with. So like, it's no wonder that we're struggling in this world, because it wasn't built for brains like this.
I'm wondering if it was built for anyone, to be honest.
I don't think it does anybody much good, but our brains, in Medicine Woman, I wrote about the sick women of the world, the women who have developed autoimmune conditions, who are being diagnosed as neurodivergent, who are struggling with unknown sickness and struggling to function in this world as canaries in the coal mine. I wasn't the first one to say that, but it's absolutely a truth for me that we are a symptom of what is going to happen not much further down the road for those who are less sensitive. It's just we're struggling more now because we're more sensitive. But we are just the sensitive cusp of humanity. We're not non-human like some people like to monsterize people with high sensitivity or neurodivergence or mental illness, and they like to make them other. But no, we are just a more extreme neurotype, a more sensitive neurotype. And so, you know, we are really, the struggles that those of us who are highly sensitive are having in the world are struggles that everyone's having to a lesser degree, and everyone will have more and more as the world continues in this way. So you were asking me about the skills and abilities, the positives.
The gifts. So, and I'm particularly thinking in relation to, because I know a lot of sensitive women who listen to this obviously resonate with the witch, and particularly resonate with being healers or guides, or they may or may not realize that yet. Some of them have a clear knowing that that's what they're here for, but there's definitely a theme of sensitivity, and so I'd love to explore like all of the gifts essentially that this brings with it.
Well, sensitivity in our culture is still, it's kind of a slightly negatively kind of painted word. Like if you say somebody is very sensitive, you're not usually saying it as a compliment. And yet sensitivity does have, when the senses are not overwhelmed, being sensitive literally just means you are picking up more sensory information. So you are picking up things that other people are potentially missing. One of the really interesting things about a neurodivergent, especially autistic mind, is that we tend to see all the details first before the bigger picture, which is why we get overwhelmed, because there's an awful lot of details in any new place, in any new person, in any new thing. So we see all of them, we're trying to take them all in, we're trying to process them all, and then the brain hits overwhelm. Whereas the neurotypical brain sees a new thing in terms of a snapshot, like big picture, here we go, this is what we're doing, and then it gradually hones in on various details. So, you know, you can see how processing the world in those two different ways leads to a very different experience of the world. So a highly sensitive person is picking up details that a lesser sensitive person wouldn't be aware of. So, I mean, that's why, you know, highly sensitive people, you know, make good perfumes creators and tarot readers and psychics and healers, because we're picking up all the little things that other people are missing. So that sensitivity is in all different ways. So we're sensitive to human behavior. We're really aware of patterns, pattern seeing, pattern reading, which, you know, is an incredible skill in its own right. And then being able to recognize and then order and reorder patterns. I mean, that's at the basis of pretty much any creative field. Which again is not something that the average neurotypical brain does very well. The average neurodivergent brain loves that. See my colorful bookshelf.
I know, I was thinking that earlier. I was like, I love that.
So it's that sort of thing. It's being able to so I mean, that also kind of goes into kind of intuition and stuff, knowing without knowing how you know stuff, picking up on more than just the five senses that we are officially aware of, but knowing stuff in a way that you might not know how you know it. And again, that can be tricky because as a woman, you know, people who could do that were considered witches, and, you know, you might consider yourself mad if you're having premonitions or, you know, kind of lucid dreams where you're seeing things that actually happen or something. Like, that's really kind of quite freaky and scary because we're not told that reality works like that, and yet here are our brains seemingly being able to do that. A real affinity with nature is another massive thing, an ability to connect with animals, with plants, to know what they need, to empathize with them, to feel their feelings, to really communicate on a far deeper level and have a far deeper relationship with the natural world seems to be a very common thing for neurodivergent, but especially autistic people, because that sort of communication seems to come more naturally, that non-verbal communication. What else? I mean, just the sheer energy that can course through us, which isn't kind of confined by a neurotypical way of functioning. So we can have huge kind of whooshes of creative energy, of kind of inspiration, of just the ability to power through 5 days work or whatever in a matter of hours. We usually pay for it on the other side and then go up for a week. But that ability to go into turbocharge, or especially for ADHD people, to go into hyper focus, you know, brains that find it really hard to focus, that bounce around like kind of ping pong balls a lot of the time, can suddenly, when we are doing something that we love, can go into incredible flow state for hours at a time and hyper focus on something to get it done, or to follow, you know, research is another thing that autistic minds love. Like, you need something researched, ask an autistic person who has that special interest and they will find you every source you need.
I remember when I was realizing I was autistic and I was like deep in research about autism. I was like, yeah, this is
I think one of the ways you get an automatic autism diagnosis is if you go in with a thick lever arch file of the proof as to why you're autistic. It's like, yep, tick.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. Gorgeous. Yeah. And let me just see if there was anything else that I wanted to share. There's so much in that. It just become really clear that, you know, there are so many gifts of neurodivergence that aren't necessarily seen by a world who, you know, see it as something that's maybe a disorder. Or I remember going to because my daughter is coming up to, like, she's meant to be starting school next year. And I took her in and I said to them, oh, you know, she's very sensitive. She hasn't got any kind of, you know, label of neurodivergence, but I'm pretty sure that she is. How do you deal with that? And she started talking about, you know, well, so we've got special educational needs and you know, all of this stuff. And yeah, it was just really interesting to me, because that's not at all, like, I haven't actually got a diagnosis, but it just made so much sense to me that it's like, well, I didn't need somebody else to, because of the way that I view the world as well. I've done a lot of exploration of sort of holistic health and, you know, all that sort of thing. But yeah, it just didn't make any sense to me that somebody would see it in that way because of the lens and the worldview that I've come from. So I found that really interesting.
Well, I mean, you know, it in schools, it has kind of been neurodivergence of all flavors, be that dyslexia or ADHD or autism, has very much been put together with intellectual disability, learning difficulties and disabilities, whereas actually a huge amount of neurodivergent people are higher than average IQ, you know, have very, very intelligent minds. They just don't quite know how to use them and how to use their energy, because nobody's ever taught them, because all they've ever been told is don't be like your being. You know, you get this kind of, you get communicated to you all the time, just be yourself, and then you're yourself, and you're, no, not like that, don't do that, and don't do that. And so people who are neurodivergent usually quite early on learn to be pretty defensive around most people, and learn to mask or have certain ways of behaving or deflecting or defending themselves, because that criticism is there's something wrong with you is always just so messy and yucky, and especially hard when actually you're more intelligent than the person saying that there's something wrong with you. That is really hard, but you can't say that because you can't function in that moment. Another thing that is very common for people on the spectrum, and I do say on the spectrum, or I say autistic, I don't say ASD, because I don't like the term disorder with it. I don't think that's necessary. You know, autistic spectrum, absolutely fine. ASD, no interest in that. It's not a disorder. Black and white thinking. So very much seeing the world in terms of this or that, and being very kind of like not able to see any of the other possibilities between, which at some points is very, you know, you need to learn how to find the gray, and how to find, or to find the position of both and, rather than just it either has to be this or it's that, or it's an entire disaster. So, you know, that sort of thing that trait can be very helpful though in other decision making. If you're an entrepreneur and you're having to make decisions all the time in business, just kind of being able to trust your gut and going, yeah, that's that, no, not with that. And the other thing we often has is a real drive for justice for ourselves, justice for other people, fairness, equity, equality is like a baseline non-negotiable for most autistic people, which, gosh, I wish that was the case in culture at large. You know, so you will often find people who are neurodivergent in activist roles, fighting for rights, but then struggling with the group dynamic, struggling with misunderstandings between people, struggling with the black and white thinking of not being able to see another's perspective, see that there are more than two alternate things. And I think that's where we've got to very much around the gender kind of issue, is kind of this kind of black and white and justice thinking kind of like coming in together, and not being able to kind of try and find the both and more solutions to that. So I think somebody who is neurodivergent will often have experienced many breakdowns in relationships, blow-ups of relationships, things just catching fire around them and them not knowing what has just gone on. So when I was writing my book, Burning Woman, I didn't realize that I was autistic. And when I read the audiobook, I had just got my diagnosis. And it was, you know, I write in there about that experience of burning with passion, wanting to express it, the terror of what happens if I express it, and then that thing of women burning each other with shame and judgment. And I was like, oh my God, a large part of that is the autism piece. And I didn't realize that. You know, and when I wrote
as well.
When I wrote The Rainbow Way, which was my very first book, that was for creativity and motherhood. Like, how do you get creative when that's what you really need to do, and yet you're a mother of young kids and you can't find the time and the space? And the majority of the women who contributed to that, so that was before I knew what I was, have now either themselves or one of their children have been diagnosed as neurodivergent in the 12 years since that came out. And so it's just really interesting that, you know, back then we were all speaking in terms of highly sensitivity. Now we've all had the diagnosis and have that lens now as to why we were struggling so much with early motherhood, and why we didn't feel like we were fitting in, and why the creative rainbow mother archetype spoke so deeply to us. You know, I think it's rather lovely that, you know, it's called the autism spectrum, and there I was writing about the creative rainbow mother. You know,
oh, yeah, I love that.
It just, yeah, it just made a lot of sense to me. Kind of having a more mainstream term for what that creative rainbow mother archetype was, that meant so much to me and so much to these women who discovered it. Actually, that's what it is.
That's so beautiful and magical. Yeah, that's gorgeous. Well, I'm just loving this. I'm trying to think if there's any, because I'm just conscious of time, if there's any other questions that I want to ask you before we complete. I think we touched on it a little bit about the importance of diagnosis. And again, I'm not sure, you know, whether, I think the important thing around that is, like you said earlier, for me, it's like, well, the deeper invitation is for us to begin to own this for ourselves, because I think that's one of the challenges of, you know, why we don't meet our sensitive needs. So I don't know whether you want to say any more on that, or if there's any kind of, if someone's listening and they're really resonating, but maybe they haven't really heard much about neurodivergence and they are just, you know, aware of being sensitive, are there any kind of things that you would recommend for them to begin to understand this a bit more, or any kind of practical things that you can recommend for them? Or I don't know, whatever you can think of.
On my website, lucyhpearce.com, I have a blog post, and if you go to @LucyHPearce, which is my Instagram handle, you'll find it in my link tree in my bio, a blog post called I Am a Unicorn. And that is my kind of coming out post about telling the world that I am autistic. But at the end of it, there is a massive list of resources that I have put together over the last few years of tools and resources that I found really helpful on my journey. So there are books, podcasts, tests, you know, kind of self-tests, which are free online, individuals who are speaking and writing about this. It's a real gold mine. So if you're looking for a rabbit hole to dive down of, you know, kind of things that might shine some light on whether autism is or isn't, you know, and other neurodivergences, I would point you in that direction, because I love resources. I mean, you know, I'm a writer. I do an awful lot of reading for my work. I'm a researcher by profession and by inclination as well. And one of the things that kind of, I had a fabulous diagnostic experience, wonderful. But the only kind of downside was his resources were very kind of old, and there weren't many kind of online ones, and they weren't really about women. They were just for autism in general. And so they were kind of more towards children and men. And so I really wanted to get a good list of resources in one place together for women especially, but women and girls. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people have used and loved and thanked me for those resources. So I would point you in that direction, because yeah, it's just handy to have stuff all in one place.
That was definitely one of the resources that I geeked out on when I came across. Yeah, it's like, oh, look at this.
And I add to it kind of every few months. If I find something new, I'll pop it on there. So it's always expanding.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's gorgeous. Well, thank you so much, Lucy. It's been, I think this is just a really powerful episode for all of our listeners. So yeah, I'm deeply appreciating you for sharing your wisdom on this with us. And Yeah, I would love to no, I know you've just shared about the I Am a Unicorn blog. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about what you're working on, or anywhere that people can find you if they want to find out more? And yeah, if you can share, because I know you're also a publisher and you have loads of amazing books. So if you can share any of that, I would love to hear all about that as well.
Absolutely. So my next book is co-authored with one of our Womancraft Publishing authors, our witchy author, Sarah Robinson, who wrote the very popular Yoga for Witches and Kitchen Witch. So we have banded together along with 12 international kitchen witches to put together the Kitchen Witch Companion. So it's reflections on the magic of food and cooking, the magic we can make in our homes when we work with the seasons. So 2/3 of it is writing reflections, recipes, rituals, and then the recipes bit is about 1/3 of it, and they are mainly vegan and vegetarian. Huge amounts are wheat free, dairy free, because we both have those struggles. But it's a beautiful seasonal book to really celebrate the magic of the kitchen, of foraging and finding and fermenting and making together and sharing together. So that's out November the 3rd, and I illustrated that as well, which was really fun. There's 200 illustrations in that of all the herbs and spices that we've used in there. And then on March the 1st, so it's out everywhere, Amazon, Womancraft Publishing for signed copies. March 1st, my next solo book, so my 12th book, is out. It's called Crow Moon, Reclaiming the Wisdom of the Dark Woods. And it's all about finding your own symbols as you navigate dark times, as you navigate midlife, as you navigate the dark wood inside where nothing makes sense and everything is falling apart and you can't find the path forward. And as well as a celebration of literal and actual woods and crows, and how they can be our guides and our places of refuge and solace and sanctuary as we navigate internal turmoil and transition. And that has 30 women from around the world who have found meaning in crows. So they're contributing to it as well. So it's another celebration of many women's voices. And all of our books are available signed from womancraftpublishing.com, which is my company. I started 10 years ago, and we have an international array of authors, and we feature women artists on our covers. We publish 4 books a year. I've just spent the last 10 days going through a massive, foot-high pile of manuscripts looking for our next book. So it's very exciting. So head along there and have a look at what we create.
I love that. That's gorgeous. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just been a pleasure to have you. I always love my time with Lucy. Here are my takeaways. Highly sensitive women are often also neurodivergent, a word which is commonly understood by labels such as autism, ADHD, or things like dyslexia or dyscalculia, and mean that we have different from typical brains. Neurodivergence can show up in a lot of ways, but the main way it can present itself is having a sensitive nervous system that is overprimed, as well as feeling burned out, touched out, and overwhelmed by our senses. We have a deep sensitivity to noise, scents, clothes on our skin, lights, electricity, and other things. The label of neurodivergence can be really helpful in aiding us to see that there's actually nothing wrong with us as a sensitive soul, and that we're just wired differently and struggling to fit into a world that wasn't built for us. Owning it this way can help us learn to navigate the world in an aligned way. As sensitive women and neurodivergent women, we must learn to honour and meet our own needs so that we aren't constantly overwhelmed and our nervous systems don't reach meltdown. As we do meet our needs, we can reclaim the gifts in our sensitivity. And there are many gifts: creativity, brilliant minds, the capacity to spot patterns, entrepreneurial skills, deep passion for things, high empathy, and sensitivity to other worlds. In other words, all the clairs, for example, clairvoyance, a capacity for lucid dreaming, a high importance for truthful expression, hyperfocus, and a real affinity with nature. It's common for these gifts to make sensitive souls excellent healers, as long as we can reclaim the gifts in our sensitivity. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.